Well, so I recently underwent a minor operation, and so today's video is going to be a bit about karma and the effects that we cause in ourselves, either good or bad, depending on our past actions. I'm Doug Smith of the Online Dharma Institute, that's onlinedharma.org. If you're new to this channel and interested in living a wiser and a kinder and a calmer life, consider subscribing to the channel. And click the bell down below if you want to receive notifications when I come out with new videos. Also, if you're interested in taking a deeper dive into some of the elements, the teachings of early Buddhism, check out onlinedharma.org and the courses I have over there. Karma isn't necessarily a strange or weird thing. Karma is really about our actions having consequences, about skillful actions being the sorts of things that produce good consequences for us, and about unskillful actions having the opposite effect, and about knowing the difference between the two of them, about seeing that difference and understanding why it is that we should pursue certain of these and not others. So in my own case, I have a basal cell carcinoma, or I had basal cell carcinoma. I've actually had 6 of them. This is my 6th. Something I'm used to and aware of. And so recently went in for an operation to take these out. It's called the Mohs procedure, if any of you know about this. I'll put up a photograph here. Here's me with what my doctor calls the sympathy bandages, basically pressure bandages just after the surgery. And as many of you will know, basal cell carcinoma, like basically all skin cancers, is due, at least in part, to sun exposure, to a lot of sun exposure over time. And as such, it's not really, we're not really talking about an ethical action in the sense that, karma is really about ethics. It's more about skillful and unskillful. Okay, taking too much sun, getting too much ultraviolet exposure is an unskillful action. But we have to say that there is an element here that's at least related to some of the topics under discussion, to the topics of karma. That is, there was an aspect of greed involved in my own past, greed towards pleasant experiences, the experiences of being out under the sun, the experience of perhaps not putting on suntan lotion enough, let's say. There was, of course, an element as well of ignorance. The 3 major bad karmic influences are greed, hatred, and ignorance. And there's ignorance as well, ignorance of the potential effects, or ignorance at least of the extent of the potential effects of sun exposure. So this is an example where, we can at least make the case that karma is to an extent involved. And indeed, I have a photograph of myself as a little young child on the beach. Here we can see me digging probably a sandcastle with my brother on the beach. This is the kind of thing that I would do as a kid once a year perhaps with my family, go down to Florida, go down to different kinds of sunny places, spend time out in the sun, get a sunburn or two. This is the kind of thing that would happen regularly. And now we see the consequences. But there's a deeper Buddhist question here that I'd like to get into, which has to do with personal continuity. It has to do with who we really are. That is to say, are these really the same people here? I have the photograph of myself recently, just a couple days ago, with these sympathy bandages on, and a photograph of myself as a kid. I don't know exactly how old, but quite a bit younger than I am now. To what extent are these the same people, and to what extent are they not? This is a deep and important, really critical question in Buddhism, and one that I think can illuminate some of what we mean by the self within a Buddhist context. And in one sutta, which I'll put a link to down below, the Buddha talks about this in the context of karma. He basically says that if we say that the person who did the action is exactly the same as the person who receives the result of that action, if we say they're the same person, he says that we lean towards what he calls eternalism, or this idea that there is an unchanging, permanent self or soul that continues identical from past to future. And the Buddha rejects this option. If we look for such a self, we don't find it. We don't find it in our body because our body is constantly changing with new cells coming and going, or at least parts of cells coming and going at all times. If we look at it within the mind, we don't find it because of all the parts of the mind, they're constantly changing. Our perceptions are changing, our wishes and desires are changing. If I think to the way I was back as a young child on the beach there's very little, frankly, mentally that we have in common. I know that I had very different beliefs and desires back then than I do now, very different wishes, very different ideas of the world. While there is a continuity here, and we'll get to that, we're in no way the same person if we look at either the body or the mind, which is really all there is to who we are. And indeed, I have no recollection of this particular photograph. My mom just recently gave me a bunch of old photographs of myself, and I found this in that group, which was kind of lucky because I can use it here, but I don't know when this was or where it was. I assume it was probably in Florida because that's where we were a number of years visiting my grandparents. But I don't have any recollection of this event. So, that's part of the issue here, that, memory is one of the ways, I believe it was John Locke within the Western tradition talked about personal identity being sort of constructed by our own memory. We can question that, but in any event, I don't have a memory of this anyway. So, these are issues about how we construct a self in this circumstance. On the other hand, the other option that we might take is that these are two different people. That this is one person when I'm a child on the beach. It wouldn't be I, of course. It would be somebody else who was this child on the beach, and a totally different person a few days ago coming out of the clinic and with the sympathy bandages on. And indeed, you'd even say that was a different person than who I am right now speaking to you. And the person who began this video is a different person than the one speaking to you right now. And the Buddha rejects this option as well. He calls this annihilationism. The idea is that there's a real person that exists for a period of time and then is annihilated. Whether that be at the end of their lives, or as we might say in this particular circumstance, that there's a person that exists for, let's say, an instant and then is annihilated and replaced by a different person. And of course, this doesn't seem right either. It doesn't seem right that I'm a completely different person. I mean, for one thing, it would seem to make a hash of karmic consequence, because it would seem not to be at all justified that a totally different person would get the karmic consequence of what somebody else did at the beginning of, or in a different lifetime, if you like. One person did one thing and the other person gets the consequence. That seems rather strange. And more directly, there's such a continuity between these two people, or between these two events, if you like, such a continuity that it seems strange to call these completely different people, and that's why the Buddha doesn't do that. And in the present case, the continuity has to do, among other things, with skin damage, right? This one event back many years ago, or many events like this that are being typified by this photograph, these events have a continuity to what's happening right now, to the surgery that I had to undergo. Skin damage. Same skin, or at least same enough to be important, to have caused cancerous cells to grow. And it's this kind of a causal continuity that constitutes all there really is to being the same person in Buddhism, certainly in early Buddhism. So then we might well ask, what is the Buddha's real response here? Because what the Buddha is doing in this particular sutta, and I'll put a link to it down below, is to say that he's rejecting both of the obvious options, both of the easy options. He's rejecting the option that it's the same person who does the deed and gets the result. He's also rejecting the option that it's a different person who does the deed and gets the result. So he's rejecting both the obvious and simple options. So what is the third option? The third option, the Buddha says, is basically what he calls, and what we might call, dependent origination. That is, that there's a particular causal stream, a particular stream of causal connections that connects these two events in the same stream, if you like. So there's an example of ignorance at one time producing pain at a different time, or ignorance at one time producing rebirth at a different time, if we're talking literal rebirth, if we're talking from a traditional standpoint, because that's how traditionally rebirth was understood. But even if we're going to be, let's say, more secular about it, or just concerned with this lifetime, we can talk about ignorance producing a kind of diluted sense of self at a later time, that we get attached to things, and that attachment produces a sense of self within us, that we construct a sense of self around our actions and our desires and our wishes. And so in this particular circumstance, what we have is, let's say, ignorance about the role of sun damage to our skin at one time producing suffering at a later time in the same causal stream. And this is indeed the way that we can see that karma has consequences. That karma isn't something weird, it's something simply causal. And it's a way, an understanding of these kinds of karma in this sense can help us to see the difference between skillful and unskillful actions, and why it is that we should look for the skillful and avoid the unskillful. It's not because of some godlike decision that one is right and the other is wrong, but it's rather that there are certain actions that will produce good consequences for us, and there are other ones that will not. That we or whoever it is in this causal stream will be reaping either the benefits or the pain of whatever actions we take. And so to that end, I think it's important to get to know this complicated idea of the Buddha's it's complicated, but not that complicated, of dependent origination. And I did an earlier video on dependent origination. I'll put a link to it here up on the screen if you want to know more about it. I'd recommend taking a look and getting to know more about it. So thanks so much. I hope we'll catch you on the next one of these videos. And meanwhile, all of you, be well.